I'd like to move on to our panel discussion. So during this panel discussion, we're going to be looking at how to utilize thought leadership as an enabler to differentiate your proposition. And businesses are witnessing changes like never before. It presents a major challenge to the marketing world, and it's become imperative for professionals to change the way of thinking and analyze the market potential and challenges that exist. Marketers of today are gearing up with new insights, creativity, and analytics to turn businesses profitable and meaningful, and thought leadership is certainly a big piece of that. So today we're joined by three speakers: Lily Wadhwa, Executive Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at Ancora. We're also joined by Matthew Royce, who's the Marketing Director for Syntax, a leading global managed cloud provider for mission critical applications, and Annalisa Dominic, Chief Marketing Officer at OpenGear. Now, I'll give you guys a quick little introduction if you don't mind here. Lily is an accomplished engineer with over 25 years of wide-ranging experience in modern and emerging technologies. He's also is a recognized thought leader and a frequent speaker on a wide range of important technology topics, including cloud adoption, data science, data products, AI, and predictive analytics and digital services. As the Vice President and CTO, he focuses on the use of advanced technical tools and methods in Ancora's client services, while raising awareness of the company's thought leadership through external speaking engagements. He co-leads Ancora's technology practice areas in support of the company's sustained growth. And previously, Lily was Vice President of Advanced Analytics at Westco Distribution, where he was responsible for building the company's data, advanced analytics, and digital capabilities across supply chain and operations. So very excited to have Lily with us here today. Now, our second speaker, Matthew Royce, is the Marketing Director for Syntax. Again, they're a leading global managed cloud provider for mission critical applications. He's a creative, strategic, and visionary thinker with more than 20 years of marketing experience who can help a company successfully conceptualize, develop, and implement revenue marketing, digital marketing, and demand generation strategies and programs in a global, fast-paced, and unpredictable environment. Matthew has a track record of creating high-performing teams, successfully managing outside agencies, growing brands, and building the sales pipeline. Can balance strategic thinking with execution as well. Before Syntax, he was Director of Marketing Communications at Foresight Technology, a Sirius Computer Solutions company, and served as a publicist at the National Geographic Channel in Washington, D.C. He taught social media and digital marketing classes at Duke University as well. So again, very privileged to be able to have you here with us, Matthew. Last introduction very quickly. I know Annalisa Dominic, we already did have a chance to introduce you for your topic earlier, so I appreciate it. But for the sake of anyone who joined a little bit later, Annalisa is responsible for leading the global marketing organization with OpenGear, with more than 30 years experience in the telecommunications industry, where she's held positions in sales, marketing, product development, and management. As a result-focused leader, she specializes in developing creative, integrated go-to-market strategies to increase revenues of existing and new product portfolios. Prior to working at OpenGear, Annalisa held marketing and product development management roles at Ericsson, Telstra Global, BT Global Services, AT&T, and IBM, so very well versed. She's been instrumental in the development and deployment of several innovative first-to-market products and applications, and has developed creative, integrated go-to-market strategies, increasing revenues of existing and new product portfolios. She holds a Master of Science in Marketing with honors from Rochester Institute of Technology as well. So again, across the board, just couldn't be more excited to be able to have you guys join for this panel discussion.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. So I'd love to start the panel discussion with a quick conversation that kind of maybe highlights or overviews a little bit more about thought leadership. So I'd love to understand, Matthew, what according to you is thought leadership and why is it so relevant now in today's context?
Yeah, thank you, Skylar. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so thought leadership is really about surfacing those earned secrets that your company has earned, those unique perspectives and experiences, and those resources that you have to really inform your products and services, your philosophy of your brand, and really how you help your customers and future customers. So it's really about sharing that thought leadership with your audience for the purpose of building, credibility, trust, and ultimately loyalty.
Oops, sorry, I was on mute there for a second. Annalisa, I'd love to have you follow up with this, and I'd love to understand your ideas of thought leadership and why it's also relevant today.
Well, I think thought leadership is the ability to actually be a little disruptive and engage at a higher level of most of our customers. So instead of trying to sell widgets, we can actually go in with solutions and ideas that can be disruptive and helpful at the same time. So thought leadership sets you apart in terms of how you're going to market, what you're marketing, and how you're speaking to your customers and your prospects.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Lily, do you have anything to add here?
Sure, Skylar. So, first of all, I don't come from a marketing background. So, I don't have the expertise that Matthew and Annalisa have on this subject, but you can be sure I have a point of view. And, we'll figure out over the next few minutes whether that point of view is right or wrong. And, happy to take all inputs from everyone. So from a technology viewpoint, I come from a technology background, 30 years in the technology industry. I think that there are 4 key pieces of thought leadership, at least in my mind. So I think the first is, it is all about demonstration of expertise in some specific area. Along with that, I think number 2, very critical to have some genuine passion in that area, because my view is if you don't have the genuine passion, then it becomes very difficult to communicate ideas in an eloquent manner. And, communication of ideas and thought leadership is key and critical. I think it's very important that, we need to create value for multiple stakeholders. So Annalisa and Matthew, they talked of clients. At least from my perspective, I think employees are a part of thought leadership value creation. Sometimes, your technology partners or vendors could be a part of it. But for a technology company, I think also very importantly, the tech community is a stakeholder. Because what happens in the technology industry is, at least the software side, there is so much of open source that everybody's consuming that it's also important to give back. Because if you don't, then open source will come to a halt. So thought leadership and community, at least from a technology industry perspective, needs to be tied together. And lastly, Skylar, I think it's important to recognize that thought leadership could drive some very simple changes, like sharing your experiences, sharing your challenges, sharing your solutions, your failures. Frankly, all thought leadership is not positive. And on the other extreme, it could be as impactful as changing the direction of the industry. So these are the 4 things, at least in my brain, that I associate with good quality thought leadership.
Absolutely. And I think that a few of those points even help to address kind of the next question that we'll go into. So that's a beautiful segue, which is really, as we think about the thought leadership, how can brands really become a trusted name, and what goes into the thought leadership that really helps to build that value and that trust, outside of the excitement and thinking about some of those other parameters. So I'd love to get your perspective to start with that, Annalisa.
So first of all, I think Lalit should have been in marketing.
Agreed.
That was a great answer. So for me, thought leadership strengthens your brands. And, it can be about your failures. More importantly, it should be about your successes and how we can help the customers drive the success into their organizations. So if you're associated with a really strong thought leadership piece, your brand has the luxury of being tied to that. But I think at the end of the day, it's really about driving a differentiator and being disruptive and being helpful and being considered a trusted advisor.
Absolutely. Matthew, I'd love to hear your ideas on what goes into thought leadership that helps to build the value and the trust behind it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I really think thought leadership is about having a point of view. It depends on how contrarian point of view you want to be and how aggressive or, I guess out there, how far of a thought leader you want to be. You really got to provide that thought and really analyze the trends that are going out there. So depending on what industry your customer is in, what their job title is at their company, really bringing those unique insights and perspectives to their role, to their company, and how do you differentiate yourself? So how would Syntex be different than a competitor when we would come and provide that thought leadership content? I see a lot of content out there that's not necessarily thought leadership. It tries to be thought leadership, but it's not. So you really got to earn that trust and credibility through being differentiated, knowing the trends, not being salesy, and really taking a point of view.
Yep, that makes complete sense. And maybe Lalit, as you think about it from your perspective, I'd love to hear kind of as you engage with even thought leadership pieces, what makes you feel as though that's more valuable or more trustworthy than maybe another resource or another thought leadership piece? What really, in your experience, has helped stuff to stand out, if that makes sense?
Yeah,
Sure,
I think.
Scarlett.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead, please, Matthew.
No, you were going to chime in. I want to hear your thoughts. So go ahead.
Okay. So I think Matthew and Annalisa both touched upon probably the most critical piece, which is differentiation. I think Matthew also pointed out, you have so much of content available. Frankly, in certain areas, there is clear oversaturation. That unless there is some differentiation, the value to the audience, and the audience could be anybody, could be employees, could be clients, could be community, as I mentioned, the value goes down very, very rapidly. And, it simply degenerates from being what you at least thought was thought leadership. I think there are two at least additional ideas I'd like to throw into the mix, Skylar. One is, just like anything else, any other project, I think we should have mechanisms to track the results of thought leadership, because if you track them, you will collect data and you will be able to iterate. And if you don't do any of these, you'll continue on the same path that you've been doing always, without being mindful of the fact whether the audience is really connecting with what you're trying to bring to the table. So that's number one. Number two, at least my personal experience is that depending on audience, certain subjects resonate much better than generic subjects. So as an example, if I'm trying to reach software developers, then the topics that I'll usually pick up are things like my observations with this technology, or my challenges, or my failures with this technology, or the solutions that I was able to build with these technologies. So, very personal viewpoint, with the aspiration, or at least the hope, that somebody else walking down the same path is probably encountering similar issues and will find this useful. Now, if I'm trying to reach a little bit more senior audience, generally the topics that we would talk about are things like best practices, or we would talk of things like future trends. So depending on the audience, if you understand the audience well, I think every piece of audience or every part of the audience is trying to get your personal perspective, which frankly, I think is largely the value creation or a value generation through thought leadership. Putting together simply data without your personal interpretation of that data, I don't believe is high quality thought leadership. And Matthew, over to you because you had a point.
No, I would add on to that, and I think what Skylar and his team are doing with the data, I think that really drives that thought leadership. How do you bring in that third party perspective? I could, for example, tell our sales team, you should do this, you should do this, but until they hear it from a third party perspective, then they'll finally listen to you. So you do need that third party data. Or if not, you do it your data yourself, and a combination of both will really help you differentiate and stand out.
And I think that again,
if I could add something, Skylar,
yeah, sorry.
It doesn't necessarily need to be data from an organization like Markets and Markets either. I think sometimes the best thought leadership comes from our customers, and in our customers' voice, how we're helping, how we're driving, how we're evolving, whatever the case may be. If you can have your customer on that journey with you, for me, that has been the best thought leadership I think I've seen, hands down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we kind of circumvented and answered our next question, which was, can we share some tips on how fellow marketers can stand out as thought leaders? So almost to your point, Annalisa, being able to make sure that you are engaging very directly with your customers and understanding their needs, I think definitely plays into that. But and I think kind of the discussion we had is almost a piece of that. But Matthew, do you have any other points that you'd like to say on just kind of some tips that fellow marketers can use to stand out, especially as we think about the types of information that all marketers in the different industries kind of do have access to Annalisa's point?
Yeah, I think you definitely need to hear from the customers to add what Annalisa said on that. I think where, people can stand out in terms of thought leadership is really to avoid the curse of knowledge. And what I mean by that is it may be in your head. It may be, technically you may have the capabilities, the skills, but can you put it on a piece of paper? Can you communicate it in a setting like this? Can you communicate it in a video in a way where your mom or your dad or any of your family members can understand some of those technical details and put it in a way where it's thought provoking and compelling? So I think a lot of companies, have really smart subject matter experts, and sometimes subject matter experts think they're communicating the message, but are they really communicating it? And so that's where I get the curse of knowledge is, not everyone knows what you know, and you got to make sure you really can communicate that message in a simple, concise way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we spoke a little bit about the contrarian piece of it too, right? So being able to kind of stand out with that, I think all definitely points out. Lily, if you have any other kind of points on how how marketers in general can really stand out as thought leaders. I know I kind of had you start on that point there, but if you have anything else, I'd love to hear any additional thoughts.
Sure, Skylar. So I think, there is always a push and pull between having to align with the brand voice. Every company aspires to have a brand voice. I think one of the problems that we end up creating for ourselves with that brand voice is, it's too corporate-like. And now you're trying to do some sort of a human connection through your thought leadership, and the two of them collide. So finding the right balance between the two, the brand voice is critical. The ability to demonstrate at a corporate level your skills, your expertise is critical. At the same time, recognizing that human connection, that simplicity of message, that people-to-people communication when you are delivering thought leadership is even more critical. Storytelling is an integral part of thought leadership, because without that, great thought leadership, that may be generated by true subject matter experts, simply does not get communicated. So you may have uniqueness of content, you may have specificity of content, but that push and pull between the brand voice and the ability to have that human-to-human connection and the simplicity of message can destroy all that expertise.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So I appreciate those insights, really fantastic. So Annalisa, my next question is around content. what according to you are the thought leadership content that B2B readers are looking for and engaging with? And as an extension of that, does where they are in the customer journey make a difference in your eyes?
Yes. Um, yeah. Yes. Of course, you always have to take into account audience, and then there are multiple layers under that. The decision makers, are they influencers? Are they just generally curious? Do they have the solution? Don't they have the solution? So you have to be really, you have to go about it in a pronged approach. So if you're generating thought leadership for an overarching audience, your tone, your message is going to be one thing. If you are being really specific and targeted, it's going to be another thing. So when you are developing all of these great pieces, they could be the best thing since sliced bread, but if it's not relevant for the audience, they're not going to read it. So you have to be really thoughtful and purposeful behind the strategy for the piece. Who is the audience? Who are we trying to reach? Why are we trying to reach them? Where are they in the buying decision, et cetera, et cetera. So you can't just sit down in a room and go, oh, I have this great idea and I want to write this thought leadership piece. If you're not going to use it, and I think that's where a lot of us fall short, is being really prescriptive with how we're going to promote it, where we're going to use it, where we're going to put it, where it's going to live. And is it something that's going to live, that's going to be updated as technologies change and product and solutions changes, and we see new data out of it. So there's a lot of work that goes into thought leadership if you're going to do it correctly, I guess is the bottom line here. And I don't know if Lalit or Matthew have anything to add to that.
Yeah, absolutely, Matthew. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this and really what kind of where or what content they are looking for. What are you seeing them engage with most? And again, I know we talked a little bit about the customer journey and whether or not it makes a difference, or the sales funnel, whether or not you still believe in that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would definitely say thought leadership, if the funnel still exists. Some people think out there that the funnel may not exist and it's more of a circular thing, but that's another discussion. I definitely think, thought leadership's in the beginning. Who are you? And if you're a smaller brand or a smaller company, thought leadership can really make an impact with the decision makers and really put your stamp on the map. Now, in terms of, your question was around readers. Not everyone loves to read. Some like to consume video, especially the millennials. They like shorter content. So it really depends on the formats, and you have to have it in, many different formats: imagery, video, written word. I think historically, a lot of us have done written word, and certain people, learn differently through thought leadership. And I would say one more thing around content is you got to make sure that they're kind of pillared or clustered together. So, for example, in our world, if we have all our cloud content together, all our security content together, and then show how there's interconnection between cloud and security. So, for example, so at the bottom of an article, you have 3 other thought leadership articles around similar topics. So that when your readers do consume content, they kind of do the Netflix binge type thing, where they binge a lot of content all at once. And you got to make sure your thought leadership content, there's enough of it, it's updated, like Annalisa said, and it's really impactful, so that they come back and read more of your content.
Absolutely. That makes total sense. So it can be really challenging to both, from the conversation we've had, I know, both create and evaluate the effectiveness of thought leadership pieces, as it does take a great deal of information to create and then kind of judge, right? Especially depending on the types of initiatives that you're trying to focus on. So I'd really love to have a discussion around how much time it takes to source the information as you're looking to kind of create that thought leadership pieces, and what sort of information we need to kind of build this content and make sure that it's going to resonate as well as possible, and where you find the data to kind of validate those thoughts. Matthew, if you could start off, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, so I mean, it does take a while to develop content. especially interviewing the subject matter experts. So, making sure you have a good process involved to interview those subject matter experts, and then, split them up into different pieces. So for example, we do a video, maybe a 2-minute video, and then we could slice it up to, 5 30-second videos around that. It really gives that, social media appeal. So it definitely takes a while to create that thought or leadership content to really do it well. But I'd love, my other panelists' thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, so Annalisa, same kind of question. What sort of information you guys generally look for when you're looking to build the content? And I know you said outside of the expertise piece with Matthew has pointed out, I know that you mentioned a little bit about conversations with customers and clients. I'd love to hear a little bit more about those conversations and what you look for when you're really looking to build that content. And again, kind of the validation of, right? Hearing from your clients is always a great piece of it, but is there any other things that you're doing to kind of validate maybe what they're saying outside of just your client base, and to really make sure that it's going to be, covering all the information that matters?
Yes. So you have to be able to stand up the data at the end of the day. So, people can say they have this great idea and that it does X, Y, and Z, but at the end of the day, you need to be able to ensure that the data is accurate. So of course, a markets and markets would be really beneficial in terms of looking at overall industry and components of that. But it's also in talking with your customers, the solution, the innovation, and it comes down to, is it a story that can be retold, and can it be digested in multiple formats, and is it valid? Is it important? So there's so many pieces of decision making that goes into the creation, and then the validation, and then the usage of it. That would be a decision tree that's a little crazy. But for me, again, the best thought leadership pieces is always when it's your customer talking, sharing their results. That just at the end of the day, I think is a win-win for everybody. It gets them brand recognition, it gets us brand recognition, it helps them, it helps us, and then everybody wins. So it's like, big happy family. But you have to validate. It's got to be validated, and it has to be unique, and there has to be a differential to it. There is so much content in the world. None of us will be able to read all of it while we are here. So make sure it's valuable.
Yep, I completely agree. And you're absolutely right. There's definitely a content overload or abundance. I would certainly agree with that. We're all trying to kind of fight through here. So Lalit, I'd love to hear from you as you kind of engage with those pieces. How important is that validation of those thoughts? And as you look at thought leadership pieces that are maybe a little bit more contrary, like Matthew had pointed out before, as companies kind of try to claim the stake, how do you really kind of trust that information, and how are you evaluating it, I guess, when we're looking and thinking about like the validation of those thoughts and their kind of relevance in the space?
Right, Skylar. So I think Matthew mentioned a critical point, which is around, are you able to capture the attention of your audience, given the amount of, or you said abundance, I would say oversaturation of content, on frankly, any topic at this point in time. Mm-hmm. And, the oversaturation or the degree of oversaturation simply continues to grow. So over and beyond the metrics that everybody tracks. So, when you put out something on a digital medium or even in person, through surveys or through tracking mechanisms, you're able to figure out the degree of association or degree of engagement that you're having with your audience, sometimes in near real time. There are two qualitative metrics that we try to, build into our thought leadership pieces. So the first is, are we able to engage the audience in the first 30 seconds or a minute or whatever it is? Because, specifically when reading or even during presentations, the mind span that is available to focus on a topic is very, very limited and goes down very rapidly. So that's number one. Engagement with the audience very early on. I think the second important thing, as far as we are concerned, is this thought leadership in whatever form or format it is it adding to the conversation? Is there a new idea in here, even though that idea may be very, very small? The problem, Skylar, is, when we do thought leadership, or any company does thought leadership, we get so vested in it that we forget what the audience's viewpoint around that thought leadership is. And trying to take a very dispassionate view of the value of what you're creating becomes very, very difficult. And breaking that mold, doesn't come overnight. When you have people within the company patting you on the back and saying, yeah, it's well done, but your audience really is not connecting with it because your data is showing that the audience is not connecting, you've got to go back to the basics and you have to understand, take a dispassionate view on why the audience is not connecting with whatever we have generated. So, that is an important point for us. Great content can be created, can be delivered wonderfully, can be tracked, and we can figure out, is there real engagement or not? Need to take a dispassionate view around that engagement, because without that engagement from your stakeholders, actually there's a lot of effort being put in for very little value creation.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. And especially as we think about evaluating thought leadership pieces, it can be tricky when thinking about the time period that the thought leadership piece is being judged over, right? If we're doing a piece that's talking about the shift over the next 2 to 3 years, and it's meant to drive immediate interest, we can see maybe even over the elongated time that it'll continue to have value moving forward, especially if we're thinking about industry shifts. So I'd love to understand how we evaluate the effectiveness of these pieces, as you had honestly mentioned, Lead. I think that's again a brilliant segue here. So Matthew, how do you evaluate the effectiveness of your thought leadership pieces, given the struggle of having different timelines that these pieces are going to really be relevant over?
Yeah, I love what Loid said in terms of the time. That's what YouTube says in terms of the first 30 seconds are so critical for YouTube, and that's how they view how well a video is going to be performing on YouTube. So that's definitely a key metric, and I love that. I would say, how well is your story told? How great is that adding that original idea? So for example, at my previous company, we talked about cloud computing. How is cloud computing, changing the world? And we related to how Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile, and now that's how cloud computing providers like AWS, Azure, Google are all breaking the 4-minute mile, and now it's repeatedly done. But really, you had to change that perspective. And so, if you can tell a story like the Roger Bannister story about how things have changed, I think that's a successful thought leadership piece. Bringing into something that everyone can relate to, and then how does that relate to your story of how you're telling it? So you may not necessarily have to have the information or the story, but you need to know how to connect the dots to other stories so that people can relate to your thought leadership. And I would say if it's evergreen, it can last. If that story can last beyond just today and can last many years, I think that thought leadership is very powerful and very effective.
Wonderful. Annalisa, any additional thoughts on how to evaluate the effectiveness?
I think for me, it's revenue, or it's right. How many new sales calls did we get out of it? How many new customers did we get out of it? How many viewers did we get? How many downloads did we get? There's so many metrics to look at from a success perspective. At the end of the day, we are all businesses and we all want to generate revenue. So it's the success of your thought leadership just boils down to, did you generate more sales that generated more revenue, right? So that's how I see it. And it's funny because some of the best thought leadership that you would think would be the top performing aren't necessarily the ones that are helping to generate the revenue. So, you have to be mindful and track and ensure that you have a cadence of checking on that and determining where it's being used, how effective it is, and what the results are at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And out of curiosity, I know that again, kind of when it comes to the cadence and checking on it, it brings up another interesting point. How do you time the publishing of the content? Like, how do you know when too much is too, or when it's too much or too little? Is there any way that you kind of look at it from a calendaring perspective?
Well, you look at it at a calendaring perspective, but that's not the only metric that you have to take into account.
Mhm.
You also have to listen to the market and listen to your customers and listen to your sales organization. So you can have the best calendaring metric known to man, but if your sales guys are saying this isn't doing anything for me, or your customers are not engaging, it doesn't matter what your calendar looks like, right? So I always harken back to, you need to have a pulse on the market, you need to be engaged with your sales organization, and you need to be engaged with your customers in order to drive better content, more engagement, and ultimately revenue. So it's, yes, you can do this in a calendar fashion. You can say, I'm putting this out then and I'm putting this out then, but if it's not performing, you need to know why. And if it is performing, you need to understand why too, right? So there's a couple of things that need to be taken into account.
Absolutely. So just to put a bow on it, let's maybe talk about maybe the negatives inside of thought leadership. So what, according to you guys, is the problem with current B2B thought leadership content? And if we could share some maybe examples to put a bow on it for good content or not so good content, I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts. And Matthew, I'll have you start.
Yeah, so I did talk about that Roger Bannister story. That was one of my favorite. I would say a lot of thought leadership content, since there's so many out there, is salesy. So really, a lot of thought leadership content today is not thought leadership at all. There's no thought and there's no leadership to it. So you got to really think of those two words, thought and leadership, and what does that mean? So because a lot of companies are doing more because of the global pandemic. A lot of money is going to thought leadership, but are you doing it correctly? Are you doing it properly? Are you really providing those unique perspectives to the customer? And research shows that B2B decision makers are consuming more content, but they're also seeing a lot of bad content out there. So really, how to stand out is really just produce great content that other people don't have out there. And so if you can do that, you'll be successful.
Perfect. And Lalit, I'd love to hear from you on maybe a piece of good content that you've seen versus maybe one that stands out for not so good content, if there is one that comes to mind. I know the more positive ones kind of tend to stand out in our minds a little bit more. So either way.
Right. So I'll give you, Skylar, a slightly contrarian view. And, there's a little bit of data, not enough amount of data, I would say, to back it up. I think Matthew and Annalisa talked of a lot of best practices, and yes, if those best practices are not being followed, then you don't end up with what you are aspiring to do. But if you notice thought leadership, largely today, it is all about my successes or our successes. We did this, we achieved this. There is very little that is talked of failures in thought leadership. I think failures are a very integral part of thought leadership. And sharing your failures with the stakeholders are very important, at least in the technology world or the software engineering world, the world that I come from, because it prevents somebody else walking down the same path that you did. And you would often see comments on, far more comments from people thanking you, around an article that you put together, which said, this is how we ended up failing. And so this is something that should be prevented or shouldn't be taken up. So, when choosing the right topic, I think failures is an equally important piece than the successes with thought leadership.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for those insights. I'll encourage the audience here, if you have any other questions for us. I know we're about 2 minutes over, so we'll just ask really quickly if there's any questions that we have for our panelists here. If not, again, you can always engage with any of us directly through the portal from the event. But I'll give you a quick minute here. Okay, looks like We don't have anything coming in quite yet. So with that said, I'd like to thank again all of you for joining for the panel discussion. It was brilliant. I think that it led to a fantastic discussion around some of the ways that thought leadership can be leveraged, the best ways to be able to use it, how it can be judged, and what are the most critical pieces of it. So really appreciate all of your guys' time. Thank you so much.